Okay, welcome to Bible Study Genesis. We're going to try to combine all of Noah into one big class. So, for those of you that don't know, last week something shut down for the first time of doing this. Zoom just died on me. So I'm going to combine both of the classes this week, and we're going to try to do 5 through 9, which is the big story of Noah. Now, what happened last time was I started recording and then I went to share, and it was at that point that everything died. So if that happens again, we've tested it multiple different times. I'm sure it won't happen, but it will if I don't say something. If it happens again, just hang in there. If you get booted out, try one more time, and I'll keep trying to access it for a couple minutes, okay? If I cannot access it, I'll send an email out on my phone. But I feel good about this. I feel like it's going to happen. So far, so good. Okay, here we go. Here's where we've been. We have been through the background and context. God creates in 1 and 2. And then we heard the story last of Adam and Eve and the kids. Now we're going into the flood. And given the intensity of this topic, I'm going to incorporate many cartoons throughout. So there will be many you will be seeing today. So that's our topic for today. Before we go into that, though, we're going to start with Genesis 5 before we wrap up, because there's some important stuff there and there. So would somebody like to read? Go ahead, Tony. Oh, you're on mute, Tony.
Okay. When God created mankind, he made them in the likeness of God. He created them male and female and blessed them. And he named them mankind when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness, in his own image, and he named him Seth. After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Adam lived a total of 930 years, and then he died. When Seth had lived 105 years, he became the father of Enos. After he became the father of Enos, Seth lived 807 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Seth lived a total of 912 years, and then he died.
Long lives, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about this. So chapter 5 tells us that we're in a new session. So it says this is the account. That's going to be a new one. And let's talk about why that genealogy matters. And we got to go back to remembering about who this story was written down for. It's written down for the exiles in captivity in Babylon. So at its core, this story is written down to remind those people that they are a part of a larger family tree that is firmly planted in relationship with their creator. That's really, really important for the original audience. It's also going to show that the line of descendants extends from Seth and not Cain. So all of the lineage is going to flow out of Seth, removing that connection to Cain. And it not only is going to connect it back to Adam, but it's going to take it forward to Noah. And chapter 6 is going to start basically moving that forward. Now, the reason actually this is so important is because in the 17th century, these numbers were used to estimate when the earth was created. Sunday, October 23rd, 4004 BCE. And that is the date that is still used by creationists today. So using the math from here, from Genesis 5, is how creationists to this day use the date of the earth's beginning as October 23rd, 4004. And that dates back to the 17th century. Okay, let's move on to Genesis. I'm not going to have anybody read this one. I just want you to look at the number of years coming up in here. So we've got Lamech living 595 years. Lamech lived a whole total of 777 years. And then Noah was 500 when he became the father, right? So why do folks live so dang long, right? Most of them are living close to 1,000 years. So let's put our ancient eyes on this, the lenses of the original readers. And these lifespans are using the idea that these superhuman lifespans, so the ancient lifespan was probably 30 years, right? And we're talking about almost 1,000 years. This is kind of a literary method to show that there's going to be a very dramatic shift in this human drama. After the flood, you're going to see those lifespans shorten dramatically, unless it's a remarkable person like Moses. Okay. Okay, let's get into the story of Genesis. Chris, you had your hand up before. Will you just read this one?
Sure.
Oh, did I say Moses? I'm so sorry. We're going to read the story of Noah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chris.
When human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, "My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. Nephilim. The Nephilim were on earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord.
So one of the first things I hear from people about the Hebrew scriptures is it's a violent, awful God, right? And this is probably one of those passages that people would turn to and say, I don't believe in that God. I don't want anything to do with that God, right? So that's why it's so important to put on the lenses of the original readers. Genesis, that is really, really important. And we're going to talk about why that is. Because Israel was not unique in ancient times of having flood stories. Great flood stories were very common in all of the cultures surrounding Israel, Samaria, Assyria, Babylon. In all of these stories, there's a family that builds a boat. It takes the animals on board. The boat rests on a mountain, and you release the bird to see if the water is gone. And these stories have been passed on through oral traditions, and they were adapted and shared. And remember, the ancient Israelites are no longer in Israel, they're in Babylon. So historians believe that there was probably a catastrophic flood in the Near East around the year 2900 BCE. And it would make sense that many cultures struggled with why did that happen, right? But we're not going to read this as a scientific or historically accurate event, right? The ancients, though, were interested in why something like this could happen, and specifically what role did the gods play. This is not a story unique to the God of the Hebrew scriptures. I want to read you this. Then was the launching full of difficulties. There was shifting of ballast above and below till 2/3 were submerged. I loaded into her all that I had of gold and of living things, my family, my kin, the beast of the field, both wild and tame, and all the craftsmen. For 6 days and 6 nights the winds blew, torrent and tempest and flood overwhelmed the world. Tempest and flood raged together like warring host. When the 7th day dawned, the storm from the south subsided. The sea grew calm, the flood was stilled. I looked at the face of the world and there was silence. All mankind was turned to clay. The surface of the sea stretched as flat as a rooftop. I opened a hatch and light fell on my face. Then I bowed low, I sat down and I wept. The tears streamed down my face, for on every side was the taste of water. I looked for land in vain, but 14 leagues distance there appeared a mountain, and there the boat grounded. Kind of sounds like Noah's Ark, right? It is the story of Gilgamesh. This is a story that the main character is named Gilgamesh. He was a king in ancient Samaria and an actual historical figure who ruled sometime between 2800 and 2500 BCE. The earliest copies of Gilgamesh are Sumerian. They could be as old as 3rd millennium BCE, right? So the version that we have dates to about the 17th century BCE, and it's a retelling of a story that is very, very much older. Parts of this story recount the flood. The gods had created humans to be their slave laborer, but they had become too noisy and they disturbed the gods. Kind of similar to what you saw in that first section, right, that we read of Genesis. And then the god Enlil decreed that humans should be destroyed in a flood. And an other god, this laborer, through the help of the god, escapes the wrath of this other god by building a huge boat in which he will save humanity. So the themes should be pretty similar, right? Here's some of the similarities between the story of Gilgamesh and the story of Noah. Both have a huge flood, both build a huge boat by divine command. The boat has very specific dimensions. You'll see that in Genesis and you'll see that in Gilgamesh. Clean and unclean animals come on board. We're going to talk about this a little later. Some Noah figure and his family are saved. Both stories, the boat ends up on a mountaintop. And both stories, a bird is sent out. And then there's a time of sacrifice, and then some type of oath is given afterwards. Those are the key elements of both stories, right? So it's important, I think, to know that, to keep that in your mind. Whenever you hear somebody say, oh my gosh, I can't read the Old Testament because it's got that angry God. This is a great example of a really angry, awful story. It's not unique to the Hebrew scriptures. It's an ancient story that's been told in lots of different contexts, probably relating back to some catastrophic event where ancient people were trying to figure out what the heck happened and where was God in all of that. Okay, so important to keep that in mind. So Genesis 6, it's a really horrific moment, right? And I'm going to turn to Jewish theologians to make sense of this. In this moment, the human experiment has failed, and there is no other option but to kill everyone and everything. And God regrets making humanity. God is changing God's mind, which is interesting from a kind of a, is God changeable? In this story, God changes God's mind, right? And God seems kind of like a tyrant on this, right? So for ancient Israel, the center of the story centers upon the fact that, and this is something we're going to see coming up in the rest of Genesis a lot, there are standards for humanity because humanity is made in God's image. And the flood is God's response to not living up to those standards, to not reflecting God in the world as image bearers. God's going to start over with a righteous man of Noah. So I'm not gonna spend time with having anybody reading on this. I'm just gonna call out some of the things, again, similar to Gilgamesh. You've got the righteous individual. He has his family. They're gonna save. God's gonna put an end to everything, and God is gonna direct this righteous individual to make a boat. And then God is gonna bring the flood. Just as an FYI, in the Bible, that Noah is the first person to be called righteous. So of all the people we've met so far, Noah is the first one to be called righteous. Noah, throughout the story, is going to speak and walk with God. So, which is going to be very unique throughout Genesis, and it's going to carry on when we get into the stories of Abraham and his descendants. They're going to have incredibly close encounters, intimate encounters with God. Genesis is a story where God is like right there, right in the midst of it. And Noah's going to get very prescriptive descriptions of what he needs to do by God, from God. So God's going to tell him what exactly he's going to take, what he's going to store, and Noah is going to do exactly what God tells him to do. Okay, once the ark is completed, God's going to instruct Noah to enter the ark with this remnant of the animals. So I'm going to turn to a little comedy to illustrate the next part of our Bible study. Here's the first one. Here's the second one. Here's the third one. There's a shocking number of good comics about Noah. Okay, next one. The Far Side, Jim Larson did a lot on Noah. He seemed to really enjoy that theme. I think that kind of looks like, that looks like Mimi, Diane's dog. Okay, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about the animals that come on. Who wants to read this one? Go ahead, Diane. And then we'll do you, Marie, next one.
The Lord then said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I have found you righteous in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, and 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal, a male and its mate, and also 7 pairs of every kind of bird, male and female, to keep their various kinds alive throughout the earth. 7 days from now, I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and I will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature I have made." And Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters came on the earth. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives entered the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Pairs of clean and unclean animals, of birds, and of all creatures that move along the ground, male and female, came to Noah and entered the ark as God had commanded Noah. And after the 7 days, the flood waters came on the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, on that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened, and rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights.
Thanks, Diane. Okay, so I will tell you, of hearing this story, I always thought it was 2 and 2. I didn't get that it was 7 and 2, right? So more clean animals than unclean come in, 7 for the clean, 2 for the unclean. And the rain is going to fall for 40 days. So in this story, clean animals is a clue for the exiles Israelites. It's their story. It's written for them. Judaism at the time of the Babylonian exile had understood this concept of clean and unclean animals, even though the scriptures had not been written down until they went to Babylon. That's going to show up when they write down Leviticus. But some animals gods accept as sacrifice. Those are clean animals, and some God doesn't. Those are unclean. So it reads basically as a reversal of Genesis 1 and 2. Chaos is going to reign. So it's an undoing of everything we saw in Chaos 1 and 2. Okay, Marie, you want to take this one?
For 40 days, the flood kept coming on the earth, and as the waters increased, they lifted the ark high above the earth. The waters rose and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. They rose greatly on the earth, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. The waters rose and covered the mountains to a depth of more than 15 cubits. Every living thing that moved on land perished: birds, livestock, wild animals, all the creatures that swarm over the earth, and all mankind. Everything on dry land that had the breath of life in its nostrils died. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out. People and animals and the creatures that move along the ground and the birds were wiped from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark. The waters flooded the earth for 150 days.
So just imagine, within the context, this is an ancient story, and probably tied to a massive flood. Some of the imagery here, I don't know if you've ever been in a floodplain, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense of what it looked like. So let's talk about the significance of 40 days. So this is the first time in the Bible that's going to be used. It will be used 146 times. Lots of symbolism around the number 40. It generally symbolizes a time of testing, trial, and then finally triumph. Christians most usually recognize the 40 days as the 40 days of Jesus in the wilderness, the 40 days of Lent. So think of 40 as a number symbolizing kind of a trial or a time of probation. It can also mean a really long time. Okay, now we're going to come to what happens when the rain stops, right? So you've been on this boat for forever, right? And the rain has stopped. Like you would assume that the story is going to turn out one way, which is they're going to get the heck off that dang boat, right? But that's not what happens. Okay, who wants to take this one? Go ahead, Chris.
Sorry for interrupting. I wanted to yell at my husband to take the letters with him. I didn't realize I was not on mute.
That's
sorry.
okay. No
Okay.
worries. Anybody want to read?
No, I'll read this.
Okay, go ahead.
The water receded steadily from the earth. At the end of the 150 days, the water had gone down. And on the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. The waters continued to recede until the 10th month, and on the first day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains became visible. After 40 days, Noah opened a window he had made in the ark and sent out a raven, and it kept flying back and forth until the water had dried up from the earth. Then he sent out a dove to see if the water had receded from the surface of the ground, but the dove could find nowhere to perch because there was water all over the surface of the earth. So it returned to Noah in the ark. He reached out his hand and took the dove and brought it back to himself in the ark. He waited 7 more days and again sent out the dove from the ark. When the dove returned to him in the evening, there in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. Then Noah knew that the water had receded from the earth. He waited 7 more days and sent the dove out again, but this time it did not return to him.
Okay, before we dive into Noah's cautious reentry into the world, I just want to bring up where the ark rests, which is in the mountains of Ararat. That is in modern day Turkey, what the area that for centuries was understood as Armenia. So for Christian Armenians, this is an incredibly holy story. And for those of you that were in church last year when we baptized baby Emma, her dad is Armenian. So that whole family on her dad's side is Armenian. And Ruth made the quilt for baby Emma to give to her for her baptism, all centered around the imagery of the ark and showing the mountain of Ararat. And that was incredibly meaningful to that family, given their Armenian heritage. So that's the connection for Armenian Christians. Okay, so let's talk about Noah. Noah waits a long time, right? You would expect when the water abates, Noah's going to open the door. Instead, for 14 verses, nothing happens. The water recedes, the ark comes to rest. Noah does not step out onto dry land. So let's talk about what happens then. So Noah's still in the ark. Then God said to Noah, come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Bring out all of the creatures, right? So God's going to tell them all to come out, right? And then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. The Lord smelled the pleasing aromas and said in his heart, never again will I curse the ground because of humans. Even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood, never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done. Again, you've got to put on your ancient mind, right? Don't read that through contemporary lenses and say, oh my gosh, the God of the Hebrew scriptures is an angry, vengeful, weird God. This is the God of the ancients. So a couple of things happen here. Noah doesn't get out of the boat until God tells him to get out of the boat. And it's only then that Noah gets off the boat. Noah makes a sacrifice, and God promises never to do that again. And again, that is one of those components of the story that is exactly the same as you find in the story of Gilgamesh. When the boat comes to rest, the righteous individual does an offering, and God makes promises not to do it again. Same story as Gilgamesh. Okay, I want to talk a little about something called Midrash. Now, Midrash is the name of early rabbinic interpretations of the Torah. And again, the Torah are those first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, as Christians call them. What the Torah does is flesh out the story, adding details to the story that are specific to a text or offering insights that give the story deeper meaning. And what Midrash does is it kind of gives a bridge from the ancient story to modern and contemporary interpretation and application. Midrash teaching will say that the Word of God has a message for every time and every place. It's often daring, it's often radical. It involves hearing for all ages. So Midrash is going to ask, what do these words mean, not when they were first spoken or written down, but to us here and now? So a lot of how the UCC will look at Christian scriptures is to say, how is that still speaking to us today? That's how we would say that in UCC terms. The tradition of Midrash in Judaism is very rich in terms of taking the kernel of that story specifically within the Torah and flushing it out and adding questions, components, dialogue to it. So here's what the Midrash will say about Noah. Not a fan at all. that when it comes to rebuilding a shattered world, you do not wait for permission to start working. And that God doesn't require blind obedience like Noah. God wants responsibility, right? Sorry. When it comes to rebuilding the ruins from a catastrophe, you don't wait for permission. You get going, right? So what the Midrash would say, what the rabbinic tradition would say is, faith is more than obedience. It's the courage to create, to begin again, to do the hard work. The hero of Genesis for the rabbis is not Noah. It is not Noah. It will be Abraham to come. So, so just to keep that in mind about Genesis. Okay, and then we're going to come to the part about the covenant. So would somebody read this one to us for us?
I will, or Tony can.
Okay, I will.
Go ahead, Tony.
Then God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, and all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on the earth.
So there should be a little echo here of this beginning, that God bless Noah's, be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. That's not the first time we hear this, right? That is almost verbatim the command God gives in the early creation stories. So God promises not to flood the earth ever again, and God is going to give the rainbow as a sign of that promise, that covenant. And in here, you're going to start to see a lot of covenant language. So this is the first time this shows up in the Bible, this heavy covenant language. We're going to see much more of it in the story of Abraham. But what you're seeing is a newness, a new situation emerging, and God covenanting, making promises with humanity or with an individual representing humanity. This is going to be a big theme when we come to Abraham. Okay, so the focus of the story really for Judaism, I'll say on behalf of the Jewish teaching on this, it's not really on the flood. It's on the consequences of humanity choosing evil over common good. So that's going to be the big lesson here. So the passage really does center then on God's grief over creation, because God is intimately involved in creation. So again, I'm gonna call BS on this perception of the God of the Hebrew scriptures as an angry God. There's a sorrow in this, that what's happening, and God's gonna do the reset button. There's a reset, and there is a seed of new creation that exists and move forward. Okay, a little bit about rainbows. It is meant to symbolize covenant. You can switch out covenant with promise. Use those two interchangeably. The rainbow will not show up again a little bit in Ezekiel, hardly anything until the final chapter of the book and in Revelations. So that rainbow imagery is gone for the entire Bible until Revelations. We'll pick it back up. And it's now in contemporary times become actually a battleground between conservative Christians and LGBTQ advocates. And I'll send you a link to an article about that one. So I'm going to stop here and just do a check-in. Hold on, let me see if I can. Okay. We covered a lot on Noah, Gilgamesh, and the whole story of that. So let me just pause and check in and see if there's any questions on anything we've covered so far. Go ahead, Chris.
I have a question. This is a question I wrote down from last week. It's at the end of every paragraph, it said, and they died, except for Enoch, who was taken by God. What's so special about him?
No clue.
Okay.
Though that's really great, close reading. I don't know that one. Go ahead, Diane.
So, so the 5 books of the Hebrew Bible are as we read them, right? And
The
so
5 books of the Torah.
Torah, yeah,
So-
the Torah, right?
So
But
the Hebrew Bible is the Torah, the prophets, and the wisdom literature.
okay, so the Midrash, that teachings, is that anywhere we can read? Because it would be very interesting to see that. That's kind of the first time I've heard of, I mean, I've heard that term, but explained. And I think it would be really interesting to understand Judaism.
Yeah, I actually have a really great book. We're going to come to the stories of Abraham, and I might send it out as a reading option. It's actually by Elie Wiesel, and it draws on the Jewish Midrash of all the different stories of Abraham we're going to encounter. So actually, I'll send that out when I send out the information on the next class, because that's a really nice way into Midrash.
Right. And the other was this, whoever in the 17th century figured out when the earth was created from all of those numbers. I mean, that's the 17th century. So the rest of all of that we read, did he believe in all that too? In the 17th century that the earth was destroyed that way? Because they if that's still being believed by certain Christians that that's when the earth was created, then do they believe all of the other stories without the context?
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about creationists. I have a hard time speaking on behalf of them. So what I've done is in the email I'm going to send out today, I have a link that'll actually take you to the Creation Museum. So you can go on the website and look at their exhibits and see what they teach. I find it very fascinating how much they charge, but go and look. And then I have a couple of good articles on what creationists believe and why. And there's different types of creationists, like some have different answers. What do you do about dinosaur bones? Some incorporate different scientific components, some don't. So there's a couple different pieces I'm sending out in today's email. Most of which if you do nothing else, I encourage you to just go to the website and look at the Creation Museum, because there's an interesting percentage of our country who believe what is being taught at that museum. So I think it's important to know what it is.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Paul.
I have a couple of questions. I just realized that when you flood the world to kill all the animals, you really haven't done anything to the animals in the ocean. They seem to would do just fine, I think.
Yeah.
So was that just an oversight, or was that something more?
That they were probably, it was just an oversight because of the water was there, so it didn't matter. When I was a kid, my biggest excitement was, oh, all the snakes died.
And why was it necessary? I know this is kind of a rhetorical question. to kill all the animals when it was the humans that were the problem.
Right. So put your ancient lenses on. It wasn't necessary to kill them all, but there was probably a cataclysmic flood at some point in time
I see.
in their
Okay.
mess that did kill everything.
So it might have been the only way they could think of to kill all the humans.
How do you make sense of something that awful?
Yeah, okay.
And so these are ancient stories. We're talking thousands of years old.
And then the whole idea of having specific dates when this happened. I mean, you did a very nice job, I thought, of explaining why they lived so long in the beginning. But why were they so interested in specific dates?
I think, well, in Genesis, the authors in Genesis are just trying to show what happens before the flood. People live a long time. After the flood, people are not going to live that long. There's two different eras, right? It was people who started to read the Bible literally as opposed to metaphorically, that then got out their calendars and then turned it into an actual date.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tony.
When I was in high school, Chris, you'll appreciate this. One of the nuns was talking about it, and she said that the Tigris and the Euphrates probably had a massive flood. Both rivers flooded, and that was the story of Noah.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. What doesn't make sense to me is the clean and the unclean animals.
Yeah.
I know Jews, don't eat certain things because they were unclean, because they're scavengers. Why would God save I'm assuming why would God save the unclean animals?
Okay, so let's put on our ancient Israel. So we've got an ancient story, and it's going to be written down by ancient Israel. And so the story itself is going to be translated into the cultural understandings at that point in time. So in 5th century BCE, the practices of clean and unclean animals were already a part of the worship of ancient Judaism, that the clean animals were ones that you could use for sacrifice. That system of sacrifice in ancient Judaism is going to continue until about 50 years after Jesus dies. And then it's going to end completely when the temple is destroyed about 50 years after Jesus dies. So the people, the Jewish people who are reading these stories, are very familiar with the clean and unclean sorting and understanding of animals in a worship standpoint. So you would want the clean animals for worship, and you want the unclean animals for all of the different reasons you would need to have those animals. The clean animals are critical, though, for the ritualistic sacraments.
Okay.
Yeah. Everybody good? Okay, I want to welcome She. So She, good to have you here. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. She lives in Magnolia near the church, and you may have seen her once or twice in church. She and her family, she has a little one near the church, and has been with us for a couple of them. I'll tell you that this has all been recorded, so if you missed anything, I'll send out the recording, okay? Okay, let's go back. I want to go back. Actually, you know what? We do have a little time. I think I can finish some of. I'm going to take you through one or two more slides. Okay, let's talk about what happens to Noah. The sons of Noah who came out of the ark, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham is going to be the father of Canaan, 3 sons of Noah. These are going to be the start of the people who will be scattered across the earth, right? Okay, somebody take it from verse 20. I think, Diane, are you good reading? You said you were going to read. Take it from verse 20 to the end.
Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard. When he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders. Then they walked in backward and covered their father's naked body. Their faces were turned the other way so that they would not see their father naked. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers."
Okay, can we all admit this is a weird one? What a weird way
Yes.
for Noah's story to end. But I want you to keep in mind, again, that the rabbis are not a fan of Noah. And so here's what happened. After the flood, Noah plants a vineyard, and then things get a little weird. He drinks too much, he passes out naked, and his sons go in to cover him up. And then Noah has this really over-the-top reaction when he wakes up, and he's going to curse his youngest son who saw him naked, Ham. He's not going to curse Ham, he's going to curse Ham's child, Canaan. And he's going to say that Canaan's children are destined to be slaves. Okay, so by right of this, then, the Canaanites as a people are going to be cursed because of their ancestor, Canaan's father, saw Ham, his dad saw his father drunk and naked. Okay, so why? And again, this is one of those things that you have to put on their ancient lenses and think about the context of the original story. This story is written down for ancient Israel. In ancient Israel, the Canaanites are their arch enemies. We're going to encounter them later on in the Hebrew scriptures, because that's who's on the other side of the river Jordan when they're going to cross over from Egypt. They're the Canaanites. Israel is not empty when the Israelites come out of Egypt. The Canaanites are there. They are living. They are prospering in this land. And who gets to tell the story? The people who are writing it down. This is ancient Israel story. It's not the Canaanites. This is a way to justify basically why the Canaanites need to lose their land. They're the arch enemies of the ancient Israelites. They live in the sacred land of Israel. Okay, so again, it's a way to explain why these hated Canaanites deserve everything they're about to get, including being violently driven from their homeland. I want to read you a quote that I had at the very beginning of this course. It's a really, really good one. Regardless of the moral, spiritual, and ethical lessons that can be learned by reading Genesis, the reader should be mindful that one of the book's purpose is to provide moral justification for the eventual genocide of the Promised Land's original indigenous inhabitants, as recorded in the book of Joshua. And this is a great example of that curse of Cain. Okay, so Midrash commentary on Noah. The hero is not Noah. It's going to be Abraham. Noah is only going to save himself. Abraham is going to fight to save everybody. Noah's going to end up drunk, disheveled, and embarrassment to his children. And the key message here is that if you save yourself while doing nothing to save the world, you do not even save yourself, which is a beautiful one, right? Okay, I'm going to stop there. I was going to send us into small groups, but hold on. I don't think we have time for it. So I'm just going to do a stop and do a check-in on the Noah story in general. Observations, thoughts, reactions.
Well, thank you for explaining it, because many times I wrote, yikes.
Right?
Yeah, especially in 9. I mean, just yikes. What the heck is this? So the context, like you've been saying since day one, is so important. It just changes the whole thing for me.
I hope that the next time you encounter somebody say, ooh, I don't like the Old Testament because it's an angry God.
I say, no, no, no.
You've got a way to answer that one. Because this is a really great example where just context is so critical.
Mhm.
Anyone else? Thoughts, reactions?
Well, it is interesting that doing God's will apparently isn't quite enough. I mean, Noah did what he was told to do, and they find fault with that because he didn't save the world and he just saved himself. But then he does kind of not exemplify great behavior later when he gets drunk and then curses somebody else because they saw him.
No. It's not enough to just follow God. You also have to take the initiative in being a part of healing the world.
Apparently so.
That's what Midrash would teach you. Yeah. Go ahead, Bernie.
Well, I wanted to appreciate your explanation of who begat who and who begat whom else and so forth, because I thought, well, why in heaven's name would they take a whole chapter in the Bible to go through all of this? I thought that was a weird addition to the book.
Yeah.
And your explanation helped a lot. Thank you.
Yep. So you're basically making your understanding that it's not going back to Cain, right? So where is the line going to come from Seth to Noah? And then out of Noah's kids are going to be all of the tribes that will be spread across.
Mhm.
I thought maybe it was just testing people's pronunciation.
Well, here's the secret with the pronunciation. You just say it with confidence. That's the secret. Okay, anybody else? You all good for the day?
Mhm.
Okay, we're gonna do it one last time next week. We'll finish up with 10 and 11. And I want to go back through a couple of kind of the key points about Genesis as a kind of a review. And then we'll have a little time in small groups to debrief kind of your big takeaways from Genesis. So start thinking about what that might be. And I'll send out some creationist links to everyone. Okay.